Here we are.
Here we are. Okay. Good afternoon. After the technical difficulties that begin our show have completed themselves, it's the top of the hour, and that means it must be time for 2-on-1, the internet's best talk show. This time, of course, we're two theologians of the Disciples of Christ variety talking to another theologian about the pop culture topic of his, her, or their choosing. Hi, I'm one of your co-hosts. I'm the Reverend Arthur Stewart.
Hi, Reverend Arthur Stewart. I'm your other co-host, Reverend Stephanie Kendall. It's so cute.
I just got a little disheartened having to do all that tech stuff because
Deuces, you should know that the tech fiasco that happens before every episode is now a time-honored tradition.
That's true. It's like, have I told
I think we've had like two where it didn't like just completely. You even had to like restart your whole system 30 seconds before show.
I bought a new computer to do the show with, and it's just as bad as the old one. I'm just kidding. I didn't actually freeze. Okay, so anyhow, all of that aside, it is hot out.
It is. It's hot here too. And we just survived. We just had a storm, a big storm. It was really wet, and now it's hot, and I don't understand weather. Weather was real weathery this week.
It's a wet, hot American summer. Anyways, I'm dressed seasonally appropriate. It's like 103 degrees in Kansas, which is not the way it's supposed to be at all. It's like Texas temperatures in the more temperate plains. So I do want to point out, though, my very loud shirt that I'm wearing today, because I'm celebrating, in part, us talking about a podcast. It's like, hey, you have a face for radio, but I am not going to make mean comments about myself to myself anymore. That's something I do for self-care.
No, you are not, and I am proud of you for that. For folks who for our deuces who are just listening out there, there are parrots and lemons and Mai Tais and pineapples on your shirt.
There's also a green cocktail, and I'm not sure what it is, but I'm going to say it's Midori and Sprite.
Is that a Midori sour? Isn't that a cocktail that's green? I don't know. I don't drink green cocktails.
I used to.
I think I don't say I've never. I'm just saying I won't. But I like this because what you are wearing says a lot, because as we know, textiles have meaning.
Well, I mean, like your cape.
Like my cape. I haven't worn my cape in so long. I miss my cape. Yes, there is something about dressing for the occasion.
Well, yeah, and just like words and actions, textiles also make statements.
If you're looking for a liturgical textile,
and you should always be looking for liturgical textiles, deuces.
Yes, you should. Then you, deuces, will be pleased to know that 2-on-1 is sponsored by liturgical textilist Jeff Wunrow of Jeff Wunrow Design, celebrating 16 years of making ordinary time extraordinary.
See, I like that word textilist. It sounds like textile and stylist. The creative team at Jeff Wunrow Designs handcrafts and styles liturgical textiles.
I like textilist too. It's fun. Yes, and their processional banners, seasonal banners, grace sanctuaries across the country, probably around the world by this point. I'm just going to go out there. I'm going to say Jeff Wunrow is a world-renowned textilist because I want to say textilist more. Their frontals and paraments adorn altars and lecterns in churches of all sizes.
And clergy, just like me and Spiff, love their pastor stoles, deacon stoles, chasubles, copes, and other vestments. Jeff Wunrow Designs is proud to include Episcopalian, Presbyterian, Methodist, ELCA, Lutheran, United Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ, Unitarian, and Roman Catholic clergy faithful among their clients. Interfaith and non-denominational clergy love the inclusivity of their designs as well.
Ooh, so whether you are shopping for the smallest altar accessory or reevaluating your entire collection of vestments and paraments, Jeff Wunrow Designs would be honored to work with you and create something custom and specific and just for you, our deuces.
Yep, so visit jeffwunrow.com, jeffwunrow.com after the show for a catalog of stoles, vestments, paraments, and banners, along with ordering informations, customization possibilities. Use the special promo code 2-on-1. All one word, all letters, for 15% off your next order. Again, that's 2-on-1 at checkout.
So make sure your banner, stoles, and textile art make a bold and extraordinary statement this season, and use Jeff Wunrow, JEFFWUNROW.com, but do that after our show.
The best textilist there is. We thank you for being our lead sponsor. I I wish it were still storming out, because we could be like, let's bring in our guest, lightning crash.
I love it.
Apparently, like, all true crime is Clue. Anyhow, let's bring in our guest, Alexis Lillie.
Yay!
Okay.
Here she
Alexis
is.
Lillie, welcome to 2-on-1. Hi.
Hi. Happy to be here. I'm glad we finally made it happen. It's been a while.
I know.
Absolutely. Sorry about the wait in there. Our tech
all good.
are active.
Alexis, yes, thank you. We've been trying to connect with each other. For those of you that don't know, Alexis and I are friends. We are both New Yorkers right now, living on this Upper West Side life. So every once in a while we'll get together and I'm like, hey, you got to come on. Hey, you want to come on 2-on-1? Because
keep saying like I'm not into pop, like I am so out of the loop on pop culture. So I'm glad we found something that I can speak authoritatively to my obsession with true crime.
Which I am very excited about, because everything I threw out, you were like, I have no idea, and everything. I was like, I can make it work, but I have no idea. And this is one where I felt like, at minimum, I feel like, all right, I'll jump on this bandwagon. But admittedly, I don't listen to true crime stuff, and so not for any reason, just other than I just haven't. Which is, as Arthur put out.
Okay.
It's okay. I thoroughly enjoyed what you gave me to listen to, though. So
Absolutely.
So for those of our deuces out there who don't know you, who are you? What do you do? Where are you at? What are the things?
Yeah. So my name is Alexis Lillie, and I am also joining the crew of disciples, pastors, although I actually work at a UMC, a United Methodist congregation in the Village in Manhattan called Church of the Village. And it is a lovely, vibrant, quirky community. And I'm a chaplain in the Air Force Reserves as well. So that's kind of where my disciples endorsement comes in. Although I feel a little weird saying that, because I'm like technically taking like a leave of absence from doing that, like the requirements for that with the military. But that is still part of my identity, I suppose. Yeah.
Excellent.
Awesome.
So why true crime?
I don't know. Maybe you could help me figure this out. Every time I like talk to people that like aren't into it, they're like, so what is it? Like, and I don't listen to, like, they always put warnings at the front, and some of them I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm not listening, to the stuff that's like real traumatic and gruesome. So I guess it's all crime is like somewhat traumatic and gruesome. But yeah, I don't know what it is about like human nature or my psyche or the psyche of those that are into this genre that make it that way. I can't really put my finger on it, except that it's just like, I think there's an element sometimes of like, how could that have, like a train, like the classic like car wreck, train wreck kind of thing, like you can't look away, like how could that have happened? And something that in a weird way it's escapism, even though it's escapism into kind of like a really heavy place. But yeah, I think the combination of those two things, I don't know, has been what, like an itch I didn't know I needed scratched or something.
And for those of you listening we're talking true crime. So if this is not your genre, if you are triggered by all sorts of things, one of the things that I learned, as I said, Alexis gave me one to watch so we had all listened to it. And then I let it keep playing. And so I listened to a couple of them. And one of the things I was really surprised by was at the beginning of some of them are trigger warnings about, sexual assault or all the things that you need trigger warnings for in our lives. And so here's your trigger warning. If true crime pods are not for you, I don't know, go listen to last year's 2-on-1, because we've been doing this for years now, Arthur. And so we have things that you can go catch up on something else.
Yeah, exactly. Good advice. Yeah.
So I always like it with true crime. It's true crime as a genre seems to me like something that respects the fact that all stories aren't great stories. I veer more into history podcasts because I love British guys trying to figure out history. My friends at Totalis Rankium literally just are trying to get through all of the Roman emperors through like the fall of Constantinople in 14.
Oh my God.
And they're almost done.
Best of luck. Wow, that's impressive.
But they tell They tell a story that we only know the surface of, and they go deeper and they stack on it. True crime tends to say, this is part of the American experience. This is part of our life in it. I guess, is true crime the next step after Sunday school, so to speak? Like, is it the day that we realize Noah's Ark, God tried to murder everyone?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, as we're like, okay, how does this tie into, church or theology or whatever? And you kind of posed that question. I was thinking about it. I'm like, actually, in a lot of freaking ways, because I mean, so much of scripture, of ancient history, of stories are these like heavy things. And I love the way you put that, because I often say that, like, the Sunday school that I grew up with was all these like really traumatic stories. Like, why are you starting there with children? Like, why do you go to the fall narrative, as I was taught it, and the Noah's Ark stuff? And I mean, even like the Abraham, Isaac, told to sacrifice. Like, why are these children's stories? And so there's that piece for sure. And then there's also the fact that, like, we still need to deal with them. I don't think we should deal with them as children, but like, we still need to deal with them. And I think in that there is this like crazy tie-in to kind of like a true crime, so to speak. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, I like it too, because I think, we've talked before on here where it's like, well, we don't often hit the lectionary text. Jephthah's daughter's not generally like the text to preach on.
Or even, Jael, or the Eglon being killed by the left-handed judge.
Mm.
Even the triumphant stories that are gruesome.
Yeah.
And we don't like to go into the more toxic narratives of people we're supposed to love, like David, and things like that. And what I really appreciated, being a noob to this genre and listening, is that like it wraps it up in a way that makes me feel, not safe might be the wrong word, but I'm going to use it just to kind of like, it ties it up that I'm not worried that this same thing is going to happen to me at every turn, but it nuances the world in a way that also reminds me of certain privileges, and just, that these are part of our story. It is part of who we are as people, are these bad and awful and gruesome stories. And same with the Bible, right? And like it also is part of that narrative, that to sweep over what happens to Bathsheba and just like leave it at just David was great, is a real injustice to the fabric of community that is the biblical narrative, and to us today. To women, or to victims, or to whoever, like it leaves, if we're only focusing on the heroes, then we're losing a huge portion of what we're called to learn from community.
Yeah. I mean, both what you're both saying kind of makes me think of that Phyllis Tribble book, Texts of Terror, which to say I love it feels weird, but when I was teaching, I used to teach from it, because that was part of what I taught Hebrew Bible. And that was part of what I did, was like really try to pull up the stuff that like most of the time gets glossed over, not to glorify it. So maybe this is back to your original question of like, why true crime? There's something that's interesting to me about about kind of like excavating the stuff that most people go like, we're going to pretend that this is not here, in a way that is like giving it air and giving it space, not in the way that's like, we're going to teach this to our small children, but in a way that feels like we need to sit with this. And that's what Phyllis Tribble does in that book, and I really think is like our only option is, she does all the historical critical stuff and, does all the scholarship, but in the end, it's really like her premise is we need to just like let these women's stories be, and not try to explain it away, and not try to shove it down, but to just sit with the cognitive dissonance and the crazy facts that these are like in the texts. So that is interesting to me as well.
Well, I mean, there's something to be said about not being able to teach, children nuance. Like, okay, so like the flood, like, hey guys, let's talk about Nephilim. And really, let's go back to like the apocryphal stuff about Lilith and the two creation narratives and all that jazz. I get it. And at the same time, like, we've made the conscious choice with our children's curriculum that we're rebuilding right now at the church. We're just teaching about Jesus, because it's a lot to say like Jesus was a friend to outcasts, as opposed to saying, well, you see, the Babylonian general needed to have a spike hammered through his head. Like, I guess that might be one of the questions in that. Does the church avoid nuance because it doesn't want to put in the effort to teach it?
Yes, I would say short answer.
Yeah.
Short answer, yes. I'm one of my biggest complaints, like, I grew up in conservative churches, but like in the church. And one of my biggest complaints, like my whole life, has been, kind of this like lowest common denominator teaching, or, theology or whatever. And now as a pastor, obviously it's like, I understand kind of the need to have a common entry point for folks. I wouldn't call it lowest common denominator, but to then from there begin to engage people and give people tools and talk about some of these difficult things. So I think you can do both. But I think often instead churches kind of tend to this lowest common denominator thing, wherein nuance is difficult, and the complexity of these stories is difficult, and telling people to just, you kind of leave it open-ended and you don't tie it up with a neat bow. Like, even, when I am confronted with needing to do that in a sermon or a service or something, like, it is hard. And so I totally get the impulse to not do that. So that's the longer answer to my yes, nuance is hard, I guess.
And that's maybe the better point. Is the church seems willing to settle on easy answers, which are not full answers. And I don't mean the whole church. The church is not a monolith, but it seems like we don't invite. I'm preaching on Ecclesiastes 1 this Sunday. My sermon starts with "Nothing matters. Sorry, we're going to be a layer of plastic this thick in about 5 million years. Like, who cares?"
Go ahead. I'm wondering if so we keep saying the church and narratives and nuance and all of that. And like, after listening to, I don't know, 5 of these podcasts, like primarily, not all of them, but primarily the victims are marginalized people, and it's the perpetrator are primarily men. And what have we seen in churches who our leaders are primarily men? So is part of it the fact that is the church willing to nuance it, or is the cis-right white heteropatriarchy that has led our church for so long willing to do the work? Because there's but most women pastors that I know operate through that lens in their exegetical work for their sermons or their prayers or whatever it is. And we've already nuanced it because somehow we've gained authority in this space where we're not supposed to have authority. And so does this fall on then the more historically traditional established male leadership to say, here's where we have gotten it wrong, right? Like, what will it take for that layer of authority to be infiltrated by nuance?
I don't know what the answer is, but I resonate with the question. Because yes, I think as you were talking, I was thinking like, there is, for a lot, for the more authoritarian structure of churches, if we're going to kind of nuance it that way, there is no benefit to nuance. I mean, that's the context I grew up in, is like, we tell you what to think and how to believe. And like, they are active, I mean, probably subconsciously, but like actively not looking to nuance it, because nuance leads to then, like women finding a voice and marginalized people needing to be centered and all those sorts of things. So absolutely. Like, I don't know what the answer is, but I think that's absolutely right. It's like it's a feature, not a bug of the system, that there is no nuance in some ways. Yeah.
There's a friend of the show posted on Twitter about how the sexual misconduct prevention training is so geared towards white heterosexual men, and that I remember a decade ago being in Texas. Like in Texas, if you are in a position of authority, you are at fault for sexual misconduct, and therefore, if you are a 5'3" woman who is harassed by a 6'4" man, who is, and I won't go any further on that kind of regard. There's no room for physicality, gender dynamics, anything in there. And they teach it to a very diverse audience and a very diverse clergy as this is white hetero dudes. You can figure out where you are different. And I'll say that friend of the show, everyone who responded, every single woman was like, nope, totally the thing that happened. And there was one guy who was like, well, I don't do that, and I'm going to mail him a trophy, because that's what that post was about.
Yeah.
Well, and for these true crimes, I mean, like, there's something, I think, why people like listening to it is because it's not that far off from where we see it, like from what we understand the world to be. It's not nowhere, hopefully we're not like murdering people in our backyard or whatever, right? But like that, so for those of you that are wondering, I want to make sure I get it right. I'm looking at my text from Alexis. We listened to Crime Show, Better Take Some Shovels, part 1 and 2. So this is what I'm referencing. So pause, go listen to that and come back to us. So, like, I had no context or narrative. You just sent me one that you thought, right? Just because, like, dive in. Okay. So all of a sudden, it takes place in Sacramento, which is a couple hours from where I grew up and where my cousin grew up. A lot of time. The woman who it's about an elderly woman who runs a home for those that are in unhoused community with mental needs and mental health needs, and I think addiction issues in some regards, right? So that's what we're kind of dealing with in Sacramento. She's from Redlands, which is where I went to college. So I know, and so all of a sudden, no matter what, I was like, oh, I know this woman. I don't know her, but I know this woman. It's not that far. And so all of a sudden, what does it do, even in these really gruesome stories, to see your community? And I think, or I wonder if you guys find that true to why we should probably engage those harder biblical texts, so that maybe someone struggling with, if we do those divorce texts, let's say, or whatever, someone struggling with divorce sees themselves in the text, someone who's, who lost a brother to violence or whatever, to put these harder stories in our pulpits, does it do something for our community as a form of healing to hear their stories mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think to not do that is a disservice on many levels, like a disservice to what we call our sacred texts, whether, biblical or extra canonical or whatever, and a disservice to people, to our folks, those of us that are leading churches. And I think about, this is kind of jumping ahead because one of your questions is what biblical story is true crime or something. I mean, so we've already talked about several of them, but of course I had the show. Okay, well, I could give another one, but to give the Sunday school quote answers, Jesus, right? That's the big one that came to mind, because I'm I, now in the churches I've been in as an adult, and then I have, pastored, of course, we do, thinking of the Holy Week stuff, we do all that. And I have tried to be really intentional and sitting in that whole process. But so many churches that I have spent time in over my life, they just skip right to Easter. There's no, I mean, I had a very meager Lent experience in general, but there's really no Holy Week. There's no, it's oh yeah, Jesus died, sad. Okay, there's a cross, we have the iconography, but otherwise let's not really talk about that. And and you go right to like the resurrection, and even in like the Advent story, same sort of thing. Not that there's that level of like death and trauma, but like right after Thanksgiving, man, you start singing Christmas carols like Jesus is here and born, and there's no like anticipation and like lingering and waiting, and I think that is so important for the way that we do time. Like that's part of what I love about the liturgical calendar, but also, Stephanie, to your point of like, we're not giving people a chance to see themselves, because life isn't just Jesus is born and Jesus is resurrected and all the good highlights. It's all the stuff. And if we're not letting people having their life reflected in their liturgy, then like, whoa, that we need to like reinvestigate what's happening.
So is the liturgical color of true crime podcasts purple? Is it more
Yeah.
No, because I mean, Disciples of Christ congregations will absolutely do Maundy Thursday, and they'll absolutely do Easter, and they might have something about Good Friday. And every church I've served has pushed back on a Good Friday service, saying that's very Catholic. Where I'm like, it's an important part of the story, is what
right.
it is. Like, he wasn't just like,
what it is.
You want a snack? I'll see you in a few days. As you had stated. I will also say, with seeing ourselves in the story and finding places with it, it's so the Syrophoenician woman in Matthew, whom Jesus essentially implies is a bitch, based on you don't throw crumbs to the dogs and everything else, and he's racist.
It's also a racial slur, doesn't he?
It's actually a racial slur, and he's misogynistic. And he evolves, and he's capable of being better, because he was pushed back in community. That helped me deal with the fact that I have some pretty deeply embedded racism and misogyny in my life. You can see Jesus dealt with it. I too can. I mean, he's better with people than I, a little bit, but way more likely to want to have children around him.
I mean, I think that process of becoming, that's something I've been thinking about in relation to what I'm preaching on this Sunday, and just the importance of like, if we're not leading folks into becoming and discovering, and we're not providing places for many, not for everyone does this necessarily matter, but for many it matters, like places where they can, as we're talking about, see themselves in these like sacred stories, then like, I mean, I'm failing as a leader, but also like what kind of community are we saying that we are, if we kind of are saying that we've arrived at this way of being individually or communally, or however that manifests, and like now we've figured it out. Like I always go into this, and this is a little tangential, but I always like kind of dog some of the liberal schools of thought on like liberal fundamentalism, is like this idea that like, oh, well, now we've really arrived. I'm like, well, I grew up with that just on the other end of the spectrum. And let me tell you, like, it does not offer nuance. It does not offer people entry points. And to do that, but on the completely opposite end of the spectrum is kind of the same thing. And I think, that's a little bit of what we're saying, is like, where are there entry points for people to see themselves, and then to see what is possible, to see change, to see transformation and becoming, and all these things that now having spent many years deconstructing my way out of that fundamentalism, I see, but if you're not in that context, and if you don't have folks to kind of guide you, it's hard to find your way there, I think.
Totally. I mean, it's for years, I don't know if y'all had this experience. Also, I see Laura Blackwood Pickrell, and hey mom, who you're watching, but
senior.
there oh gosh, now I lost my listening to True Podcast or True Crime Podcast has made me, so I'm preaching on Psalm 15 this Sunday, since we're all naming what we're preaching on, which opens with like, who has the right to enter your tent, O God, or live on your holy mountain. And as I listened to the True Crime Podcast and just kind of walked Manhattan the other day, and as I'm listening to these stories and I'm looking at all the people, because we're an island with lots of people, and it's like, it makes me think of, well, and I read my scripture the Sunday after I preach, the one that I'm coming up for, just so I can start it rattling in my head, right? And so it's very much like, well, who does get to? Because I want to say everyone, and yet I'm hearing these stories. And as I'm hearing the story, I'm looking at people who then become part of this narrative, right? If you're not listening to true crime in your home by yourself, if you have people around you, they become the characters in this story you're listening to just by their proximity to where you are in that story and what you're doing. And so, and I'm like, are they invited? It pushes me in a way that I'm really grateful for, that's what I was going to say. I grew up with people being like, when I came home from college and people be like, oh, you've changed. Or like when I went to seminary, oh, you've changed. It's like, that was used as such a slur when I was growing up. And it's like, no, we're supposed to. We are supposed to change. We are supposed to grow. And I think that True Crime Podcast actually, in a weird way this week, has helped me understand that a little bit better about myself and about my own like classist judgments and things like that, in spaces where I need to grow, because I'll preach all day long that the kingdom is welcoming for everyone and that churches should be, to an extent, with the most vulnerable kind of prioritized in that space. But then you listen to these stories in which none of them are, there's no clear good guy, bad guy most of the time. There is a lot of systemic issues of why this person ended up here, how the system of healthcare or just care in general has failed them to a point in which this felt like their only option, or their mental health was not in a space where they could make kind and just, decisions. And so I was like, oh, I do want a place in my church for them. How do I, and yet how?
So we in lovely Wichita, I live near Broadway. Broadway is where sex workers congregate. It's where there's a lot of short-term, very cheap motels. There's a lot of things that happen on Broadway that they have to be somewhere. And very close to our apartments, because we checked, is where 2 or 3, registered sex offenders live pretty close to us. Like I've had to tell my daughter, like, you never talk to the people who live in that house ever. And admittedly, those people, like, there's this balance of absolute protection, and part of me is like, we need torches and pitchforks, and part of me is like, they have to live somewhere and they're registered. There's this, sorry, Spiff, playing into this point with the question I wanted to ask. When we talk about crime and we talk about harm and trespass and sin and debt and all of this, how do we present actual reconciliation with those who how do we rehabilitate and then resume? Or do
I remember doing a case study about that in seminary many years ago. But like,
specifically to that that oeuvre of offense, but rather just simply how do we prevent recidivism by being a church that welcomes people who are felons?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into like too much, like personal details in terms of like my congregation, but like we've dealt with some of that a little bit on like a, not on that kind of a level. But I think one thing in terms of like helping, we've learned, and I think in terms of like helping people integrate and thinking about like recidivism is not being, again, I think we're back at like not being afraid of naming things that are difficult and not being afraid of nuance, and learning to like, like ask people, do you have what you need? Do you have the support that you need? How are you doing with, this addiction or this thing, or, that has caused you problems in the first place or in the past, and not kind of having it be this thing that is like everybody knows is there, but we don't really like name it and talk about it, and offer support other than like being in community together, but like, offer specific support for the issues that people have dealt with in the past and that are continuing to, be a part of their lives. And I mean, I just go back to that, like naming the difficulty of naming difficult things, and yet the dire importance of doing that, I think is right here as well, when you're talking about folks that have you know, I don't know, histories of I don't know, like crime or whatever, like, you know, convictions and that sort of thing, to not pretend that it doesn't exist, but to obviously like treat it with care and love, just like you would other things, but to not shy away from it in a sense too.
Well, and why are as we're, you know, and yet I guess to this whole thing is, why are true crime podcasts so popular? Why, you know, like, is this type of courage, the naming of the things we're not supposed to, the talking of the taboo, is it fun? Is it like, and I mean, and I don't mean to be flippant for those of you out there listening who have had tragedy in which we are kind of naming. That's not what I mean, but like, but there's something to it in the like, oh, I'm not supposed to talk about that. Oh, I'm not, you know, like that, that your serotonin goes like it's like, oh, that it does something to us to say we want to continue to do that, and yet we stop ourselves. So fun may be the wrong word, but I'm using it just kind of expansively to say like, why or how do we get there, and you know, and what stops us? Why is this so? Why are because they are, people love true crime podcasts, love them.
Yeah.
And I see why, because it's like, oh, this is interesting and a part of the story that I don't know, or X, Y, and Z. I don't know, why are they? Why do people like them, Alexis? Why do you like them?
I can ruminate on that a little bit, but I want to go back to the thing you said about like naming, kind of like getting people to, or I guess what I was saying too, of like naming things. I remember when I was training for chaplaincy, and one of the things we get a ton in the military, a ton of like suicide prevention training, rightfully so. And one of the things that I remember from that was like, people are often, and this is how I felt, and so when I heard this, I was like, oh shoot, like people are often afraid to just straight up ask, like, are you feeling suicidal, or are you having suicidal thoughts? Because there's this like subconscious kind of misconception that like you're going to give them the idea or something if you name it. And so I think with some of the things when we're talking about like extending that idea of having difficulty naming difficult things and dealing with nuance when it comes to folks that are perhaps in having past convictions or offenses or whatever, it's almost like you don't want to say it, because then you're like, say it and make it real, even though you think that person is not thinking about that all the time, and it's not like playing a very real part in their life. It's like, so there's there's that weird just resistance I think we have to again, I'm back to like naming something difficult, but in terms of like why do I think that people like true crime, or why do I like true crime? I mean, I think part of it is, like I said before, like weirdly an escapism, because it's just like a lot of it is like so out there that I'm like, okay, no matter how crazy my life and chaotic, not that it's anywhere near that, but just like day-to-day like chaos stuff feels, I can kind of go and be like, okay, like this is just like, and have that train wreck kind of experience where I'm like, what? And I also particularly enjoy, that's a weird word to use, like the ones that are around like cults. And I think that partly is another layer for me of like growing up very fundamentalist and almost like not in a cult, but like I would ascribe similar qualities to it. And so there is that element of like, it feels familiar, but it's like so out there, and like, oh, and then I almost can kind of like feel good about myself too, right? Because I'm like, well, I came out of that, I escaped from that. Or in the case of just kind of like any genre of true crime, like that, my life isn't that out there. Like, okay, I feel better now because I'm kind of like contained a little bit. So yeah, so there's this kind of like weird way of that it's escapism. As strange as it sounds, and like as flippant as it sounds, I do think that is partly the case.
Yeah, I mean, I got into it because I mean, I didn't get into it. I just listened to more than the one that you gave me because I was intrigued, because it was stretching my grace muscle in a way that like things don't generally. And maybe because it was just, you have to hyper focus on it because you're just like listening, and generally it's like, it's in your ears, so it's what you're hearing rather than I don't know, the news, right? Which is like a multi-sensory thing that's always coming at you. This was like, here's a very specific one thing, we're going to talk about this. And you, in my pastor brain goes, and you're going to look for all the ways, and I didn't know that this was going to be my reaction, but it just is. You're going to look for all the ways in which you would have marginalized this person too, and the ways you want to offer them grace. And that was like, you know, hard to kind of come to terms with in some regard, because you're just like, no, these are the bad guys and these are the good guys, you know, but it's like, it's not, again, it's a lot of it was systemic, and it just feels very now, and it feels very like, of course they're liked because that's what's happening in the church. It's what's happening in our world. These systems of oppression are leading us all to make decisions that, you know, a lot of us, one decision, we could have been very close to where a lot of these people are. Maybe not the murdery aspects or things, but like just the like questionable ethics of things. And what would you do to keep yourself from being unhoused or you know, just like all of those things. There's that statement that's like 90% of America is like one paycheck away from being unhoused, or whatever the statistic is. That's not the real quote, don't quote me on that, but it's something like that, right? And so it's like
it's the majority.
Yeah, okay.
Easily majority, yeah.
The majority. Okay, so we're the, you know, and it's like, and what would you do if you know what I mean? It's like, what would you do? And so, and a lot of true crime is, what would you do? What did this is what they did. It had terrible consequences and really bad things. And I'm not talking, you know, because obviously there's lots of genres of this type of true crime. So it's like all the things, I don't know, but it was just like, oh, okay. And I think that's why I liked it, because it was like, here's that grace muscle that is being stretched really tight, because it's a little too close to home in some regards. Some of the ones, like I listened to one where it was just like, this mom did this thing for her kids, you know, and like it ended up, you know, she killed her children's abusers. And it's like, I don't know, that's not too far-fetched from a lot of stories that I have heard of people that I love dearly, or people that just say it. I don't know, people talk about it really kind of casually, right? Oh, I'd kill that guy if he came near my kids. It's not something that is unheard in community, even faithful, loving community, kind communities, that fight instinct that is in all of us is there. And I think true crime, I don't know, Arthur, what do you think? Why do you like true crime? Why does it resonate in our world today?
It's our story. It's all our story. It's not just I could do it, or I would do it, or I might do it. It's a more expansive, you know, part of the preaching moment is that we're telling a story that's been told. And to borrow from Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun, or Koheleth, rather, not Ecclesiastes. It's all the same. I think it's a development of nuance, and I like that, stretching the grace muscle. It's simply we're beings that like stories, and we might learn from them, or we might use them as examples, or we just, I mean, the reason I like true crime podcasts is because it's like, oh, that's super weird. I don't know about you, Alexis, but I always like pulling out the one little piece of trivia and telling like everyone I know, which is also why I stick to history podcasts. So I'm not like, did you know you can dissolve bones in the
lie? Yeah.
I'd rather talk about how the Stuart line of the British monarchy is going to illegitimately return when William becomes King of England. So,
how does that play into you? Are you in that line of succession?
No, it's an adopted name, sadly enough. But King Charles II stooped enough of the nobility that Diana, Princess of Wales, is a direct and illegitimate descendant of his. So,
well, there you go.
Wow. Yeah, the more you know. I also think there's like, because I was thinking about like, how did I even get into this in the first place? Which for me, it was Serial, like that, you know, the not that true crime didn't exist, you know, like Dateline has been around for a million years, but I mean, like that was like such like a cultural like flashpoint, you know, whenever 7+ years ago when that first came out. I remember, you know, like being at the gym and just like seeing everyone on their treadmill, like with their phone, like the little icon of Serial just like across. And so that was like kind of my entry point. And there's like, with some of them, there's this kind of like savior complex, not directly for the listeners, but like some of these stories have gone on, and it didn't end up happening in Serial's case, but like have gone on to like have cases overturned or to find new evidence. And, you know, and so you get kind of like, I think the hosts and the journalists and the podcasters definitely kind of get sucked into that, like, oh, maybe I can like change this. But even as the listener, you get kind of sucked into like, maybe this isn't really how it ends. Even if it's a story that you know well, if someone kind of like pulls it back up and is like looking for new evidence and getting people interested in it again, and maybe even getting like legal teams looking at it again, then you're kind of like, you know, maybe this isn't the final word. Like, and there is something there. It just came to me, so I haven't quite like put a fine enough point on it, but there is something there about that I think plays into, you know, just even thinking about like our spirituality and like it's not the end, you know, there's like more to it. Like this doesn't have to be this story, as we're talking, you know, Arthur's saying like we love story, like this, it could end differently, you know, like it's not written, it's not definitive yet. And I think there's something there that's interesting about true crime in that way too.
So I have one last question, I think, before we have to head into our final question for us all. But what biblical story would you like to see a true crime podcast of? Because as I was like thinking of my final question, I was like, oh, I think it kind of ties into all of that. But like, given the entire Bible and everything that's in it and all the horrors of it and beauty of it, what would you like to see a true crime pod about?
The one that came to mind for me was Samson. Like Samson and Delilah. I mean, you've got it all, like so many of these biblical stories like have it all, you know, like the burly guy, which you imagine as being like all rugged, and like the sex appeal aspect, and this kind of like hush hush, and he's like rejecting his family to be with this woman, and then she's portrayed as this like temptress, you know, and then all these people die. So like it's got it all. Yeah, so that would be a good one.
Good one.
Well, and how Delilah has absolutely zero agency in the story.
Yeah, right. Of course.
But that's, I guess, par for the course.
Yeah.
Spiff, what's yours?
I really kind of, I think it might be Vashti. I like the idea of how a woman gets out of that situation, you know, with men in power, survives, we think, maybe, you know, but what does it look like for women of power per se, right? She's the queen, like, to also go through this. I think that would be a really compelling, and I think honestly we're kind of seeing that in the Meghan Markle stories a little bit, of like women in power, women in that space leaving for their own health. But I think that there is something to Vashti's story that we don't think of as a crime. We think, you know, like, we don't think of what is happening to her as a crime per se. We think of it as more like, we lean into the liberation aspect of it, and it is, but I want the crime aspect. I want to say like, and here is how this king is a criminal and a sex offender towards this woman's story.
Wow.
Maybe I just want
I'd listen to that.
I know, right?
See, there's the like changing it's like the ending too, is like that kind of wanting to the end to not be the end, and to say like this can end differently. Yeah.
These stories 3,000, 4,000 years later, because there's still room for interpretation and there's still room to play with the text.
Yeah.
I like that. I would personally do Uzziah and the Ark. Like the Ark is terrifying if one reads through for Samuel. Like, it's the worst character in the Bible, because it's just like, I'm gonna murder anyone, and not really
murder dance.
Yeah, like melting Nazis' faces is the nicest thing it does sometimes. Okay, well, we should probably get to our final question then, shouldn't we? Although we
should, because this hour has flown by.
Yeah.
But Alexis, thank you for coming. Thank you for finally getting our schedules together. This was so fun.
Thanks for
keep an eye out for other things that you are interested in pop culture. Come on back.
Okay.
But as is our custom, our final question is, what biblical theme, book, character, narrative are you most reminded of in true crime podcasts?
Well, I mean, I think I kind of gave Samson as like the one answer, but like all of Judges, I mean, there's just so many. I mean, we've already named a couple, like the tent peg, and there's like a lot of good female characters in Judges as well. And there's just, there's a lot of like vindictiveness, that like divine vindictiveness, that I feel like would play really well in any sort of true crime.
Totally. Yeah. Arthur, what about you?
I'm gonna dance us right back up to the table. I'm gonna say there needs to be a Judas Iscariot. Because something we've started adding to our liturgy at the table is, on the night he was betrayed, the Christ took bread, he blessed it, he broke it, he gave it to his disciples, including Judas, and he said, "This is my body." We just toss in that little tiny Judas was there and Jesus served him. And I know I'm not revolutionary saying we should talk more about Judas, but there I am. I'm adorable and thoughtful today.
I love it. So I'm gonna go with I'm kind of in the Alexis vein, but I'm gonna go with Jephthah's daughter. And I realized I kind of played that hand early on. But what I liked about and what I kept coming back to was, in all these podcasts that you listen to, the kind of investigative reporter person like goes around and talks to all the people, right? And I think that the women that were on the mountain with Jephthah's daughter, as she kind of like does that kind of tour of, oh gosh, what am I gonna do? Also, I want like the interpretation of, is she murdered? Is it just her virginity? Is it, is it her body? Is it her life? What is actually sacrificed?
What is stolen?
Yeah, but I just think you would get just like so many incredible narratives of the women on that mountain with her, as telling the whole story. So if I was like, as I was listening to the podcast and listening to all these people, like, no, she would never be like that, or yes, she, all these things. I was like, Jephthah's daughter, who does not even have a name, on the mountain because her father has said he's going to sacrifice her, like that. I was like, ooh, that's a pod I would listen to in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Well, and just how we tell other people's stories, right? Like that they're like that. What would it even look like to have a full, novel written by the women on the mountain with Jephthah's daughter? Like knowing that it could happen to them, right? What kind of fear lives in them? What kind of a vision are they casting together? What does liberation look like? I don't know. Sorry.
That's a novel you need to write.
I was just gonna say, that's your next dissertation project.
Just what I need, more things to write.
Yep.
Alexis, thank you so much for joining us. Alexis Lillie, thank you very much for joining us. Reverend Alexis Lillie, thank you for joining us today on 2 on 1. I won't keep adding to it, but I could. A few things that we should mention at the end of the show. The first is, I can't pull up the image for Jeff Wunrow Designs, our marvelous sponsor, who is celebrating 16 years of making ordinary time extraordinary. Check out Jeff Wunrow, JEFFWUNROW.com. Secondly, I would like to say hello to my friend and our friend, Justin Tiemeyer, who listens to our show with his son, Cliff. Cliff, your dad, and he's our friend. So please do what your dad says, unless it is unethical. And finally, of course, coming up this week, I don't know. I know Justin would teach his son a strong sense of ethics. Maybe we cut that out in post-production, because that was
this is live, so it's already there.
But maybe yes. Anyways, also finally next week, the Reverend Aaron Dickey is joining us to talk the Goofy movie.
Goofy movie, excuse me.
It's a bit of a shift from true crime podcasts, but you'll see there's a lot of parallels as well. And we've got other fun stuff coming up too.
We do. And if you have enjoyed this conversation or would like to be a guest on our show, please make sure you smash that button, like, subscribe, share, do all the things, but also hit us up if you would like to come on the show. We're always looking for new conversation partners around what is happening in the world, pop culture and theology. So yeah, we did it.
We did it.
We survived.
Alexis, thank you so very much. We did survive. Crime survivors. This has been 2 on 1, and we'll see you later, deuces. Be well.
Bye.
Bye.